The plane cabin was buzzing with chatter, the hum of engines filling the background, but the moment she stepped in, something shifted. Every head turned, not out of admiration, but with quiet contempt. They didn't know her name, her achievements, or the empire she ran. Yet the whispers began almost immediately. A flight attendant's glare cut through her confidence like a knife. She felt the weight of every assumption, every stereotype pressing down on her. A black woman CEO in a space where power and privilege were assumed to be someone else's. And in those unbearable seconds, she realized they were about to humiliate her in front of the entire plane, and she had no way out. She had always carried herself with quiet confidence, but every step in her journey had been a battle against a world that refused to see her as more than her skin color. From early mornings in a small apartment to boardrooms filled with skeptical faces, she had fought to prove herself, first as a determined student, then as an entrepreneur with a vision that others dismissed. Her company wasn't just a business. It was a symbol of resilience, a testament to decades of relentless work. Every award she had earned, every milestone reached had been a silent answer to the doubters, a statement that she belonged at the highest tables. Today, she was boarding a flight to close the biggest deal of her career, a partnership that could redefine her company's future. But as she moved down the aisle, she felt the subtle shifts in energy around her, a slight hesitation, an exchange of glances, a smirk barely concealed. The world she had conquered outside these doors didn't seem to exist here. Here, on this plane, she was just another black woman, invisible in her authority, judged before she could even speak. The stakes were higher than she realized because this humiliation wasn't just personal. It threatened to ripple through her career, her reputation, and the very credibility she had fought to build. Every instinct told her to ignore it, to remain composed, but her heart raced as she braced for the confrontation she knew was coming. And in those fleeting moments, surrounded by strangers who underestimated her at first glance, she understood one undeniable truth. This flight would either be a moment of shame or a turning point that nobody on board would forget. As the plane doors closed and the engines roared to life, the subtle hostility she had sensed turned unmistakable. A flight attendant approached, her tone polite on the surface but dripping with condescension. Instructions were delivered with exaggerated patience, as though she were incapable of understanding, as though her presence in first class was an anomaly that needed correction. Fellow passengers stole glances, some pretending not to notice, others smirking behind polite masks. Each moment piled onto the last, a quiet storm of prejudice that threatened to crush her dignity. She clenched her hands, forcing herself to breathe steadily, refusing to let their ignorance shake the calm she had built over decades. But then it escalated. An attendant brusquely questioned her ticket, insinuating she had been seated incorrectly, her words carrying an unspoken assumption. She did not belong here. She could feel the eyes of the cabin on her, the unspoken judgment of strangers who thought they knew her story from the color of her skin. It was humiliating, a public spectacle disguised as a routine procedure, and yet there was a steely resolve building within her. She recalled the countless times she had faced dismissal, bias, and outright discrimination in boardrooms and offices, but never like this. Never in a space where she was supposed to feel safe above the fray, surrounded by peers and strangers alike. Anger simmered, not reckless but precise, sharpening her mind and focus. Every slight, every assumption was recorded, catalogued, and transformed into a force she would soon unleash. Minutes stretched, the tension in the cabin becoming almost unbearable. She felt the injustice like a tangible weight pressing down. But beneath it, a quiet determination began to take shape. She would not be broken, ignored, or diminished. And as she fixed her gaze forward, a plan started forming. A way to turn this humiliation into something far greater. A moment that would leave the entire airline reckoning with their own arrogance. The storm was approaching, and she was ready. The confrontation came suddenly, like a spark igniting a dry forest. What had been simmering tension erupted in a way the entire cabin could feel. The attendant, confident in her authority, made a dismissive remark loud enough for others to hear. A statement that reduced years of achievement, intelligence, and resilience to a stereotype. The murmurs that followed only fueled the injustice, a chorus of ignorance echoing in the confined space of the plane. For a moment time seemed to slow. She could feel every eye on her, some in curiosity, some in judgment, none understanding the storm behind her calm exterior. But she did not flinch. Instead she rose, not with anger, but with the undeniable presence of someone who had conquered every obstacle imaginable. Her voice, measured and unshakable, cut through the murmur. Every word was precise, exposing the absurdity of their assumptions and the audacity of their prejudice. Passengers who had been entertained by the spectacle now realized the depth of their misjudgment. She revealed her identity, not with arrogance, but as truth undeniable. A black woman CEO, a leader whose company had reshaped industries, whose influence extended far beyond the walls of this plane. Shock rippled through the cabin. Those who had whispered and stared now had to confront their error. The attendants, once brimming with authority over her, found themselves unprepared, their power evaporating in the face of undeniable reality. And just when the humiliation they had attempted to inflict seemed complete, she executed her plan. Every slight, every assumption they had made, became a lesson in accountability. What had begun as a moment of personal insult transformed into a public reckoning, the airline, unprepared for such an encounter, now facing consequences far beyond a single flight. In that moment, the plane was no longer just a vehicle between cities. It became a stage for justice. The emotional weight of years of discrimination, bias, and doubt converged into a single, powerful act. Every passenger bore witness, every observer felt the impact, and every subtle injustice was laid bare. The climax was not just her triumph. It was a collective confrontation with the very assumptions that had allowed such humiliation to occur. And as the final echoes of shock faded, one truth remained crystal clear. She would not be diminished, ignored, or erased. The aftermath was immediate and unforgettable. The airline scrambled, issuing public apologies, reviewing policies, and facing consequences they could no longer ignore. Passengers who had once sneered now shared a collective awareness, a recognition of the injustice that had unfolded in front of them. But beyond the public spectacle, the real victory lay in what she had reclaimed for herself: dignity, respect, and a demonstration that no amount of prejudice could diminish her worth. Her story spread far beyond that flight, inspiring others who had faced similar bias. Messages poured in from people who saw themselves reflected in her resilience, people who understood that standing firm in the face of humiliation was not just an act of courage, but a spark that could ignite broader change. It was a reminder that systemic prejudice could be challenged, that voices silenced for too long could be heard, and that power, when wielded with integrity, could transform moments of injustice into triumphs that reverberate. As she looked back on the flight, she didn't feel anger. She felt clarity. The humiliation had been real, the bias undeniable, but so was her strength, and the world had witnessed it. For those watching, the takeaway was clear. The fight against prejudice is not just about individual victory. It is about holding society accountable, refusing to be silenced, and turning every attempt to diminish us into a platform for justice. So next time you witness injustice, whether subtle or blatant, ask yourself, will you remain silent, or will you transform that moment into a statement the world cannot ignore? Change begins when courage meets action, and no one, regardless of color or background, should ever accept less than they deserve. If this story inspired you, like, share, and comment your thoughts below. Let's spark conversations that matter and amplify voices that deserve to be heard.